every time he opened his mouth, all I heard was, like I could not get past how boring he was.
Taking that first step might not be the best step, but it's the catalyst for you to accept change.
Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. And this is Couples Synergy.
Welcome back to another episode of Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean. Hi, I'm Dr. Ray.
And I'm Jean. And this is our podcast about love, marriage, and relationships.
Please check us out online at couplesynergy.com or on Facebook and Instagram at Couple Synergy. And please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review or send us any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear more about. And now on to Couple Synergy, an in-depth look at love, marriage, and relationships, where we bring you our experience helping thousands of couples transform their relationships for over 20 years.
You know, every day we get to hear intimate details about a couple's celebrations, disappointments, and everyday challenges. We've often wished these stories were shared because we know we are more similar than different. So we've created this podcast to be able to share these stories and help people improve their relationships.
People like today's guests, Melanie and Peter. Thank you so much for being on our podcast today, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. And so why don't you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves? How old are you? How long you've been together, and what do you guys do for a living?
All right. Well, I'm 38 years old, and we've been together since we're at 16 years, and 2007. And I spent 10 years as a police officer with the RCMP on the west coast of Canada. And now I'm currently working at a refinery and in central Canada in Ontario.
And I am 40 years old. I robbed the cradle with my husband here. And I raise my 5 babies. I homeschool them. The twins are 7. And then the other 3 children are 10, just about 12 and 13. I am a life and soul coach, so I am able to walk alongside people and helping them clear the muddle out of their brains to help them make the next right step. And I also run a network marketing business in the gut health realm. So I'm a busy mama.
Yeah. Can you tell us the story of how you guys met?
Sure. So
She wasn't the babysitter, right?
no. We attended the same church, and I was still in grade 12 and she was in college. And basically my conversations sounded to her like blah, blah, blah. And that was pretty much it. I had to try a couple more times, grow up a little bit, and had success several years later. And I played football for a year. I traveled to New Zealand. And when I came back from New Zealand, that's when she started noticing me. And we ended up having a first date shortly after that. Went to a movie, Coach Carter, and it continued on from there.
So his rendition is slightly different than mine.
Of course.
Every time I saw him, he was this tall gentleman who would always treat people with such respect. But every time he opened his mouth, all I heard was, like I could not get past how boring he was. And I couldn't help it. I desperately wanted to have a great conversation with him, and I just couldn't. And so, like he said, he went and did all these life experiences and came back. But right now, I know the listeners can't see him, but he has this short crew cut, clean shaven, and that's very similar to how he was in grade 12. But when he came back from New Zealand, he had this big afro of blonde curly hair and no more glasses, and his shirt was open with his chest hair coming out with a hemp necklace, and I was like, ooh la la, like, who is this man? No longer a boy. And so that was the beginning of yes, my physical attraction to him. And shortly thereafter, we had a very in-depth, great conversation, and that was kind of the beginning of our relationship.
That's a really interesting story. And, we hear that a lot. I think girls, when they're younger, they're looking for that. They're looking for someone that's, action and adventure, the rebel. And what they don't know, what they really want is the steady, secure, nice guy. And when he was that, he was boring.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And Peter's name means rock, and that has truly come to pass, that is what he is in our life and in our relationship, and especially for the kids too. So yeah.
So Peter, did you know she thought you were boring at the time?
Oh yeah.
What did you do with that? Because
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there that are like, maybe they don't know what to say or how to talk to girls or whatever. Like, how did you feel inside yourself when you knew that? And how did you figure out how to transform that?
I think part of it, was just understanding how much I needed to grow as a person. So there was definitely a lot of, up until the point of grade 12, there was lots of focus on, education and figuring that stuff out, and less in figuring out the ladies' realm. But I going and doing something where I, left home, I had my own place, learned what it was to take sports to the next level, took me as a person to the next level. When I went to New Zealand, I didn't go with the friends or anyone that knew me. And so part of it was learning how to accept myself for who I am and realizing that people still like me. So I didn't need to pretend. I didn't need to do anything different. It just was, I had to know that I was complete and whole as I was. And then from that point on, radiate who I was. And so there was that inner attraction that shone through because I was confident who I was. And I had grown. I wasn't just this shy, timid person that didn't think I had anything to offer. I did have something to offer, and I knew it. And that was part of, I believe, the understanding that I was okay, just me. And then now, if someone else is interested, great. But I already know that I'm complete and whole as I am.
So what's interesting is I didn't date a whole lot through college. And when I graduated college, for some reason, and it's the strangest story ever, but all of a sudden, men started asking me out, and I had 7 dates in 1 week, including a brunch date because I couldn't book it in the evening anymore. And Pete was the last one. And when I went home with my roommate and we were just kind of discussing what the week was like, I said, well, there's no reason why I shouldn't date Pete Gall again. There's nothing really there. It's not bad. It's just, I don't know. And then when he wanted to ask me out, he actually came to my place of work and he brought a dozen roses, which I thought, I hardly know the guy. This is intense. And I said, you know what? I need to talk to you some more. And I didn't realize it at the time, but what ended up coming out was the makings of me as a coach. I listed 20 questions that he needed to answer before I was going to be his girlfriend. And it was he was planning on going back to New Zealand. So I wanted to know what his plans were for that. And what did he want in terms of a family and how quickly, and what was his expectations and my role. His mom was a stay-at-home mom. Does he want the same thing for his wife? All of those questions that I think should be kind of a normal conversation, but it needed to be done in that half an hour lunch break I had. And yes. And then it was at that point that I was like, okay, this guy, he's willing to put up with my scrutiny of questions. And we started dating, not even based on mad physical attraction or love or anything. It was just a very logical there's no reason why I shouldn't date him. We have the same faith beliefs. He answered all my questions to my satisfaction. Let's do this. And it was 2 weeks later that I was shopping in Zellers. I don't know if y'all in the States have or had Zellers,
No.
this department store. And a song by Alanis Morissette came on called Head Over Feet. And I remember pushing my cart and her song came on like, you treat me like a princess. And I'm like, yes. And then she says another line. I'm like, yes. And I'm like, oh, I'm in love with him. And it was at that moment that I'm like, let's plan the wedding. And legit, we got married within months from there.
Did any of the
Wow.
other guys get the questions?
Oh, no, none.
No. How come?
No one brought me a dozen roses afterwards.
So they were cut already.
They were cut already. And I mean, by that time I was 24. Like I didn't date a lot in college, but I had had relationships prior and kind of knew what I was looking for. What I haven't told you is that when I was in college, I actually wrote out a list of everything that I wanted in a man. And Peter Gall checked all of those.
Oh. And you knew that in that date, in that 30 minutes.
Great question. Yes.
Okay.
So do you had the short date and then the roses and then the questions?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, the progression of
Mhm.
it. Okay. Awesome. And Peter, you were planning on going back to New Zealand then?
Prior to investing in a relationship with her, yes, I had plans on going back. Until I met her, I hadn't found a reason to stay in Canada at that point. And there was the only reason why I'd left in the first place was my sister was getting married. So I came back for that and was trying to figure out what was next with life. And yeah.
Wow. Okay. So then you put those plans aside for the relationship.
Yes.
how long between the roses and the engagement?
6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, 6 months.
It's really interesting. We ask all our couples that, and they're either short or they're really long. It seems like there's not a lot of in betweens.
Mhm,
It's interesting. So what is your engagement story?
Ooh, wow. So I had some help on this one and being told that this is like a story that's going to be retold and retold, and that you should probably make it a fair amount of effort into it. So and make it meaningful. So I had to make it spontaneous. So I had a couple like romantic dates prior.
Just because I'm really intuitive. Like it takes a lot to surprise me. So this is why it needed to be spontaneous.
Yeah, so I kind of got some of the things in place. I had got the ring, paid for it, had it just at the jewelry store so that it wasn't around. Her friend had helped us pick it out, but I made sure that I didn't get it, like take the physical one out of there. I got it like made with a different diamond so that it would still look like it was there.
So that, because he knew I would go back and
Yeah.
check.
And she did. So she wasn't sure what was going on there. Anyways, and then yeah, just trying to put the pieces together. So I ended up like making a home cooked meal for her, showing that like I have the ability to provide and cook, and she liked to see attention to detail. So I made sure there was place settings and like it made the table look different with candles and things like that. We had one of our first dates was at a family friend's acreage. So that was where part of the event for the night went. It was in the fall, so we did a walk through the leaves, and we had one of our, I think it was Jack Johnson, Better Together, playing when on that person's property, went back over a little creek to a gazebo, and then got down on a knee and proposed for there. And yeah, I tried to make that event as meaningful, connected to our relationship, and then also something that she would be excited about sharing with her family and friends. So
Yeah, it was lovely.
yeah.
And it was a surprise.
Yeah, like as soon as I showed up for the night, I knew that something probably was cooking, but before that I didn't know. But So I was an event planner for a hospital foundation during the time of our dating. So my job was to book events for fundraising, times. And so we were booking a year in advance at work for these different events. So I knew that if I wanted to get married in any of the higher end hotels or event centers, that we needed to get on this right away. So before he even got the ring or anything, pretty much at my Zellers experience, I said to him, we need to get married. Here are the dates that are available.
Wow. Wait.
So I had an idea of what her answer was going to be. So that took a little bit of the pressure off.
That helps. Did you ask her parents or anything beforehand?
Yes, I had. The distance is like 3,000 kilometers. So I got to meet them once, which was, yeah. So we started dating in February, and by, I think it was spring break, I went on a trip to go meet them, but wasn't quite ready to ask them that question at that point in time on the first meeting. So I ended up having to call them on the phone prior to asking her in the fall. So
Yeah.
It was an interesting conversation, but I don't remember it being traumatic or hard. So they were grateful that I asked. Yeah.
So we have this theory that, as the wedding goes, so does the marriage. So are you guys kind of like that in your marriage as well, where you're planning and you're aware of things and you're trying to figure out how to surprise her and do things a little more spontaneous?
I would say that her desire for surprises is not super high, but her desire for an excellent planning is. Mm-hmm. So I'll try. The spontaneous part would be me initiating, and then talking through the details and making sure it's going to be what she hopes for if we're going to spend time and effort and energy into it, and making it more of a she's much more part of it, and that she just loves doing the planning. So yes, I invest my time and effort into it, but I know that she appreciates knowing a bit more about it and having her say and input in it.
Especially when it comes to the kids, because I'm the one who's home with them all day and I know kind of what's happening in their schedules. So to bring me in on the planning portion of it, to me, it just makes sense. As much as like he said, if he initiates and he's like, hey, I want to care for your heart in this way, can we please go out? Or, we have his parents coming to visit us. He says, okay, let's go away. And that part is like, I feel very loved when he does that. Yeah.
So what is it about each other that you fell in love with?
What I saw was an incredibly gorgeous, attractive, and brilliant woman who shared the same faith with me, had the same, after going through all those questions, understood a little bit better about what she wanted in life for a family. Yeah. And just saw someone who was confident, and that I could see the two of us succeeding. Like I just, I really appreciated her ability to think and process on her own, and just knowing that we would be stronger together. That was just really cool, watching her skills and mine working together so well.
When I came home and decided this is who I wanted to be with, he was actually in Montreal visiting a friend, and I called him and said, can I please take you home to meet my parents? It was in the days of MSN Messenger. I don't know if you recall that. Mm-hmm. And he says, that's fine. I'm just chatting with my friend here. Can I please have a picture of you? And I was just being goofy. I just had all of my pictures in icons, so I couldn't actually see what picture I was sending him. I was just like clicking through it. And they were just random photos of me of like a museum or something. And this one picture came up of a violet, let's say, like a purple violet. And his response to me stopped me in my tracks. And he says, Melanie, you are like a wildflower that I will never try to control or tame. And I had to read that probably 15 times. And what I didn't realize at the time was that was part of my story unfolding of things that I had believed, things that I had agreed with, things that I had lived with, that he could obviously see, that I couldn't. And so when he spoke that life into me, I was like, hello, can you come home right now, please? So along with that, just his hard working ethic, like his hard work ethic was something that was really instilled in me, that I appreciated. And he was raised in a fairly conservative home, which in some ways rubbed against me a little bit the wrong way, but also there was such a deep respect that he had for people because of that, that I was drawn to. And because of that, he respected me, with his words and his body. And yeah, it was very special.
Thanks, babe.
Yeah.
Was there something in your history that made you so kind of cautious and specific about being in a relationship as opposed to just feeling your way through it? It's almost like he had to sneak up and let you figure out you fell in love with him.
You know, that's funny because he said actually, later in our relationship that he had kept my number in a little box, for 5 years as he kind of watched me and kind of waited for me. I don't know. That's a really good question. I think because of our belief in God and my desire to want to do his will for my life, like I think I was just really cautious not to jump into things foolishly or haphazardly, and wanting to be, yeah, really careful, because for us, we don't want a do-over. We don't want someone new. We want this person for life, and making sure of that as best as we could right before we said I do was, I think, of utmost importance. We can never necessarily control what happens in the future, but yeah, I think it helped us make a firm decision.
Yeah,
Was it
and like
same for you, Pete?
I had friends, I had family mentors that when I talked to them about that relationship, there was support and encouragement to go that direction. I think another big part of it is we did walk through pre-marriage counseling, which was huge because we talked through just like how to deal with finances as a couple before we even got there. We talked about, like where we started, like what does my family look like, and what do I expect
Family of
from
origin.
husband and wife, and how is my future wife's what does her family look like, and we walk through a ton of that stuff, and also understanding our own identity and how we're wired. So that was huge. Like that was probably watching and seeing how compatible we were, seeing all the different pieces falling together in that, and then taking that to like full, like that was in a class that we did that pre-marriage counseling, but then we also did private, and that was huge in establishing that trust and walking through really hard things before we even got there to the altar. So
yeah, years later we did a book study with couples, on a book called The Meaning of Marriage, and we did it with 8 different couples. And out of those 8 couples, we asked, like, we all had this conversation of who did pre-marriage counseling and did you like it? And there was only 3 couples that did it out of the 8. And Pete and I were the only ones that got such solid advice, and not even advice, but just a ton of personal growth through it, a ton of digging, of recognizing our story, where we came from, what like kind of this is going to look like, and the challenges that lay ahead of us, right? Because you don't just marry your spouse, you also marry their family. You also marry their past and the generational junk that comes with each of us, right? So, but also the generational growth and the good things to look forward to, and to have your eyes wide open to the challenges that his parents had to go through and his grandparents had to go through. And I think that was pivotal for me, especially wanting to get into coaching, and for both of us to get into marriage mentoring, of like, this is so important and not many people are getting it, and not many people know how to give it well. Yeah.
For sure. So it was part of the 20 questions to have 5 kids.
We always wanted 4. We had agreed on 4 even in that moment. And then our 4th pregnancy was twins. So surprise.
Wow.
We're not the ones in control.
Right.
Can you guys talk about your faith and how it impacts your relationship? And what do you think is the advantage of that? And, we've interviewed a lot of couples, and it seems that very few have a great positive experience with, and I'm going to call it religion, not faith or spirituality, but with religion. And some have had it where it's been just like the rock, like you said, that is, it's their compass. Yep. What was that like for your guys' journey?
Well, to start off, that's where we met, was at the church. A lot of our first interactions were in a very neutral environment, like in regards to any sort of pressures. We were at church functions. It was a safe environment to get to know each other. So that was definitely a good kind of a place for that kind of beginnings to start. Another thing was just the amount of time that we ended up spending at church meant we got to spend more time together while we were also developing and growing as human beings. So learn in that in growing our faith, we also understood ourselves better and just were more stable for each other in that. And the community that is created there were supporting us as well through that whole time. So they were the ones that connected us with pre-marriage counseling. They were the ones that got us into the classes, and we were able to host our own stuff as we were trying to figure things out with other newly married couples too. And that was the venue for us to host those things. And not only that, we would join up with other small groups and get to see, couples at that, another 10 years ahead of us or 20, and then talk to them. Yeah. And that provided a very easy conversation and a reason to mix and connect with those people. Yeah. So,
we've been through so much in our life, and we always say, now we're talking about church as an organization, but we always say, what do people do without a church? What do people do without this community, without this deep knit togetherness to help support, so Pete talked about like an organization like the church itself, but specifically in our relationship with God, is that if we trust that he will never leave us and will never forsake us, as the Bible says, and we both believe that is our firm foundation, that we are never alone in this life, even if we don't understand the answers. So it automatically relieves the pressure. Not that we live by it constantly, like we falter, but yes, he's my rock, but he is only human. And it is so unfair of me to put pressures of this life on him, to expect him to perform or to be perfect, because the only one that can do that is God. And we both are coming from that standpoint. And it's freedom for both of us. I think it allows freedom for making mistakes. It allows freedom for choosing grace for one another, for how we parent, because it's the same wavelength from which we stand and we speak. If we don't know what to do or how to deal with something, we go to the Bible. We ask the Lord, we ask our mentors who also love Jesus. And so it truly is our absolute guidepost. And, I would recommend it to everybody.
Can you guys talk about some of those challenging times where, your faith was, the glue that kind of helped get you guys through it?
The most recent one that comes to mind, or not most recent one, but this last weekend, we had a son that, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but that we had to really work out letting him have a fever. When he was 18 months old, I went upstairs. He's the youngest and one of the twins. And in his crib, I found him. So we're going to need a bit of a trigger warning for your audience. I found him lifeless and blue in the face. And at that point, I rushed him down to Pete, who whacked him on the back, and he felt his heart start beating again. That kind of started a whole series of tests and a life in the hospital, whereby he started to have 3 different types of seizures. Nobody really knew why. 1 week after I found him in his crib like that, the RCMP, the police force, had actually moved us, and we were about to move. So 7 days later, we picked up and moved somewhere where we knew nobody. So like we could just unpack all of that, because there's life with the police force, there's parenting twins, there's parenting 5 kids, 5 and under, there's a seizuring child, which you'd never know what the heck is going to happen, which then catapulted me into a deep depression. And like, our house had 4 floods, and backyard was forest fires for years on end, and he was never home, and Pete had his own trauma. Like, we could write 17 books, I think.
That's why I said which one. But to go full circle back to why the fever this weekend was important, was every time before that, he had to be medicated or he had to go to a doctor so that we could try and make sure that he wasn't having a whole bunch of seizures. Because it was, at the time when it started happening, it was fever related, is the best we could come to understand. But watching him go through this weekend, he was hitting temperatures that should have caused him to have a seizure, and it didn't. So just balancing what most parents would see as a fever running its course with their child, and then seeing them through to the other side, just kind of, and for us it was a little different, because it's like, what's going to happen if it stays up this high? Will it go higher?
Well, I don't know what would be, I think, a normal temperature for a kid, but Jed could never, his name is Jedediah, he could never have a seizure or a fever, pardon me, that was higher than 37, which for most people would be normal. And they called it atypical febrile seizures. Like you or I would have a sore throat to signify that we're getting ill, he would have a seizure. And being the youngest of 5 kids and all the other kids in school, like there was constant germs coming into our home, and therefore constant seizures that I had to deal with by myself, mostly because he was working so much in this small town. So,
and how often would this happen?
Yeah, it happened for 18 months at any given moment. The doctors did think that he would grow out of it, that he was considered epileptic. But it would be when he's drinking water, or when he's asleep in his bed, or when he's going up and down the stairs. Like, there was zero rhyme or reason to it, which was what caused so much anxiety in me, because I couldn't just let him be, or I didn't feel like I could just let him be a child. I had to constantly be with him, or someone did.
How did that impact the two of you and your relationship together? I mean, that's a lot of strain that is put on parents. A lot of parents out there struggle with that, where they have maybe a special needs kid, or kid that has diabetes, and they're constantly having to, and you're justified having to watch over your child every minute. So how did that affect the two of you and your bond together?
I think the first part of it was just feeling like there was definitely some separation in regards to just what we experienced through that. Like, I was in my world taking care of what I thought was the most important thing of, providing for the family financially, and didn't realize quite how much of the burden she'd been taking. So there was definitely, it started off as a divide. And then I guess when I became aware of what was fully going on, and we kind of started discussing how we were going to manage this long term, it meant making some pretty hard decisions, and realizing as it unfolded and the gap separated, or disappeared, and we were back on the same page, it meant a career change. It meant that I couldn't continue doing shift work and being on call all the time, that was not sustainable. Which was really hard to kind of process. And that decision was only, I guess it's now 4.5 years ago, but it doesn't feel like it was that long, because it was a lot of work to get into the policing, and then to step out of it and say goodbye to it, I think was a huge decision. But I wanted my marriage. I wanted my wife. I wanted to be a dad. That was way more important than any career. And yeah, it meant going back financially a little bit, but it was I will never regret that decision
Mm-hmm.
because I will never at the end of my life say, I wish I had worked more.
Right.
No, I am very glad that I spent the time, invested in my family,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing what's happened now, I'm even more grateful that I got
Mm-hmm.
all the years with a lot more hours with them. So
Mm-hmm.
How long was it between the time you knew that this lifestyle was a problem to making the decision to change it?
It happened really quickly once he finally found out. Because we lived in a small town, we had moved to the small town, there's only 2,000 people. So on the very first day that we moved in, Pete, as the police officer, had people commenting, "Oh, hey, it's nice to see you, new police officer. And we know exactly where you live. You just moved in down the street." So there's any sense of anonymity had completely disappeared. So when I was so low, I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I had to put cucumbers on the bottom shelf so that all my toddlers could literally open the fridge and just grab something to eat because I just didn't know that I could make it out of bed that day. I would wake up and think everything's fine, but I would be doing laundry and drop a sock and I would crumple on the floor. I just couldn't get a grip at all. But I am the type of women or people that he would take to the psych ward. Like I felt crazy and there was so much shame and so much um unknown about that, but I didn't want to let him know because what would he do with that? He was so busy with what he was doing, taking care of other people. And if he found out and he had to take time off, that means the whole town is going to find out, which means I don't want to bring him down. I don't want to bring the police force. I don't want, like, this needed to just stay with me. And I was so isolated. And I didn't know how to tell him properly. And so one day I actually made a music playlist and just labeled it Dark Times or something to do with dark. And I just showed him. And I'm like, can you take a look at this? Like, this is the state of my heart right now. And it was like screamo music or Eminem hard rap, or like, it was nothing of what I would normally listen to. And so that was the beginning of like, babe, I love you, but it's either your job or me. Like, and it wasn't an ultimatum. It was like a cry for help.
Mm.
And so um, that was in April. And every July, we would go back east for a family vacation. And we had already booked 7 tickets. And we decided that we would go east with 7 tickets and only take one home because he was going to come back to work for a couple of months to kind of finish things off. And it was quick.
everything got thrown out into the lawn, had a huge garage sale. We booked a U-Haul and started filling out paperwork for a leave from work.
Did you know
And
she was feeling this way?
like I knew that, like, because of all the different stresses that we had, I knew that there was definitely stuff going on, but I didn't know it had gone this far. Like, I think it's only in looking back and then us discussing it after after the fact,
After we've healed.
that I really truly understood like just how far things
Or-
had gone.
Yeah, or part of our healing in our healing journey. We were chatting about
How long were you guys just kind of struggling with that from the time you moved to the new community to, things that got to change?
3 years, but a year into it, I said, I have to get out of here. Like, we would drive into the town. So every time he had days off, we had to leave the city, that little city. Otherwise, he would get called back into work. And so we constantly lived, like, we weren't even settled. We constantly lived 2 hours away at our friend's house on his days off. And every time we'd have to drive home and we turned the corner to head into our little town, I just had this deep sense of dread.
Mm-hmm.
So at a year, so I dealt with that for close to 2 years. But we were in the town for 3 years.
Wow, that's a long period of time. I kind of struggle with that.
I don't.
Do you think you guys would have experienced the same thing if you were not moved into that small town and you were still connected to the community that you guys left?
I think about that a lot. I think it would have been easier for sure. You know, when you move from a town of 100,000 and neighbors all around you and a huge church community to you're on a big acreage with two 70-year-olds on either side of you and you know no one. Like community is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate your guys' story because, you know, a lot of times what you said about we didn't know until we looked back. And people get up every day and they live lives that they don't want to be living.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really know it, or that there's a way out, or that the way out is going to be okay. And in fact, much better. Because you know what you're leaving behind, but you don't know what you're stepping into.
Yeah. You know, in the realm of gut health and helping people with their health in that way, there's a saying that we always come to that the pain of staying where we are has to be, what is it? The pain of staying
Greater
where
than
we
our
are.
fear of change.
You got it.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it really is true. And it is a normal thing that we go through. In fact, the statistics say 6 years.
Yeah. Well, that's why they have the 7-year itch for marriages, right? And most couples, they wait 6 years before they actually seek outside help.
Yeah.
They just kind of stay in the same minutia and just go through a period of survival.
You know, you guys did something really smart when you went and figured some things out before you got married. And it's sort of like the same thing with any type of education. There's continuing ed, right? And so a relationship is like that. And this is part of the work that we teach, is that, you know, you can't even learn things in your 20s that you can learn in your 30s. And you certainly can't learn things in your 30s that you can learn in your 50s. So you can't even speak into that until you're kind of in that stage. It's really interesting. And there's all sorts of reasons why, including just the development of our brains.
And, you know, in your story, you guys couldn't foresee the impact of this move and to a smaller community and the impact of that on your family, right? It's something that you guys had to go through and had to figure out while you were there. What was that? Did that bring about a lot of fear to leave that career? And, you know, I know that the motivation is to be in the marriage and be with your family. And, you know, obviously sounded like a, you know, reprioritizing that happened in your life. But was there any fear involved with that for you?
100%. Yeah. Like I had no idea how to translate what I'd just been doing for 10 years into another career that would look after my family's well-being. One of the things that like I feel that God just enabled is, but one of my wife's friends reached out to her in regards to something that would help her in her current in that state at the time, turned into an income that allowed us the freedom for me to make very little money, but yet we could still survive as a couple, because she has gifts and abilities and has been doing a ton of stuff. But as she got healthier and I was able to support and look after the kids more and give her more free time to do that, she just skyrocketed. And just her gifts and her abilities were just like blossoming and growing and making us a good amount of money that gave us that freedom. So that was definitely just God's hand working through that whole thing, because I didn't know that was even a possibility at the time.
Right.
And she's still looking after the kids, still at home, doing all the things. Yes, I had to, you know, work really hard at being part of that team and doing a lot more than I had. But yeah, those were huge things. And I can see that now. But giving that up at the time, I started with just taking leave. You know, let's try this out. Let's see where this goes. Maybe I can still get another transfer. Maybe I could still get another job similar. So I hadn't completely closed the door on it until probably a year and a half after the move. And even then there was still some glimmers that it might happen, but
I think that's also where our faith comes in too. Like there are promises that the Lord will look after us when we put our faith in him. And there are promises that he will do good for those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. And so trusting that it's actually not all on us. It's not all our own responsibility. Yes, we have to plant the seed, but it's God who makes the water, like who waters it and makes the plants grow. And like Pete said, my Plexus business quadrupled. So we moved to Ontario, and by very nature of just being in a new community and in a new space and meeting new people, people wanted to know how I got better. Gut health and mental health are directly linked. And because, as you can tell, I'm free with my story and saying, like, we went through this and you can get better too. Like, here are some of the tools to do that. That gave him freedom to be able to say, okay, I need some time to kind of heal myself, because there was a lot of garbage that he saw and went through that we hadn't considered either. I wasn't the only one who was going through what felt like hell on earth. He did too. And to give him space. And so when we look back, like you said, Jean, of being able to see where we were, we're just so thankful how things have turned out, because it gave us, we're in a much better, much healthier space, emotionally, physically, spiritually, maritally, everything.
You said that you knew a year and a half into moving that this was not going to be sustainable. What took another year and a half before saying something, right, and giving him the mixtape? Do you remember the pivotal moment?
I felt trapped because we tried to move with the RCMP, and with any large organization like that, everything just takes so much time. So I think that definitely aided in my inner feelings of feeling trapped and never able to get help and always being responsible for things and whatnot. So I think we would have for sure taken a break or done something differently earlier if we could have. But at that time, the pain wasn't great enough, apparently, to say, I think you need to leave your job. Because and here is something else we learned, is in this society, you are your work. What's the very first question we ask people? Hey, what do you do? Right? Your worth is defined by what you do. Your worth is defined. Your value is defined by how much you make. How high up in the organization are you? How good are you at your job? How many clients do you have? And so to simply walk away from that, we were left exposed. What is our worth? Who determines our value? What determines our value? And recognizing our value comes from the Lord. And there is no amount of money that is going to make us a better person. There's no amount of, no career that's going to give us success, that's going to make us people who are worthy. That's only the Lord. So I think that was a huge lesson as well.
What would you say is the sacred takeaway from going through what you went through? And what would you say to couples that are struggling with something like this right now?
That change is possible on so many levels. You know, there was once a picture that I saw, and I don't know if this is overly accurate of who Jesus is, but he has a teddy bear, a small teddy bear in front of him. And there's this child crying for this small teddy bear, and he's kind of threatening to take it away. But behind his back is this massive life-size teddy bear that she doesn't know exists. And regardless of whether or not that's biblically true, it was such a good picture for me of we always have this closed-handed scarcity mentality that whatever's coming must be bad. Whatever's coming, I fear it, so it must not be good for me. And I would say, try just opening your hands and just saying, what if, in a good way? That's a huge takeaway for me. What about you?
I think one of the things that helped, and we heard it again through another one of the coaches, is just that taking that first step might not be the best step, but it's the catalyst for you to accept change. Mm-hmm. So they just because you go one direction doesn't mean that you don't get to go another direction after that, right? You can still continue making those changes and those decisions in your life to get you to the point where it does work, it does make sense.
Yeah, you're never stuck.
I, watching the finances spiral down as the income basically was cut off. Um, like we were provided for. There was people that reached out and brought us groceries. There was people that helped us out at Christmas time in our first year out here, and it was okay to be broke. It was really humbling, but it was okay, and we survived through that. Figured out how to make ends meet where we were at financially, and then grew from there. And once we had reined all that stuff in and figured out that wasn't what mattered anymore. Yeah, like things continue to happen and we continue to progress. The way our value, whether wasn't determined by that, and there was a lot of freedom in being in that place. Yeah, and that knowing that we could endure all those past things, we knew that this was another hurdle that we were just going to have to, with the Lord's help, work together at. And I think that just that team approach just became that much more entrenched in who we were as a couple versus, me being away all the time for working. And that was the only way that we could make it work. And it was a shared burden and shared load. And we could see how, as a couple, we were that much stronger when we relied on each other and freed each other in our gifts, I think is kind of where that all comes to a head.
So last question. What is it your partner does that they love you?
This brings me to tears because it's already what we said, like the fact that Pete would be willing to leave an entire career that he worked so hard for. Like he's just so sacrificial that means so much to me. And I know that I'm loved. Yeah, because of that.
For me, I feel like that she just makes a really big point of knowing that we're in this together, that we're a team, and just seeing her with our kids and her desire to take all 5 kids home and homeschool them, like it was huge. And just to know how much she loves our kids, and just to see just when she comes alive when we host events or we gather, and just the tribe that she brings around her. I'm just so glad to be a part of that, and just knowing that that's done for us and for our family and for our life is just huge.
That makes you feel loved.
It makes me feel loved watching you do all that stuff, like, and just when I see her succeeding and just the glow, like, and knowing that we did that together.
That's amazing, guys. Melanie, how can people learn more about your coaching and what you do?
Thank you for asking. www.melaniegallcoaching.com. And there's all the information there on the website. I just love being a thought partner for people, and especially if they feel stuck. Like if you're listening today and you feel like I need to make a change, but I don't know how, go onto my website and book a 30-minute session for free. And we can just kind of see where you're at and how I might be able to walk alongside of you in that.
And I understand you have your own podcast now too. Where can they listen to your podcast?
On all platforms. It's called Sustained in the Middle. As you can see, that has been kind of a theme for us, that we just, when you look back and you recognize how the Lord has actually held you and sustained you through all of life's messes, because we all have messes, we all have chaos, we all have stuff that we go through that we're like, when we look back, how did we do that? And so it's just stories about my life, 5-minute snippets about our life. A last one that just broadcast was an awkward honeymoon scenario that happened with Pete calling, "Oh, Melanie," from the basement when my mother was present. So that was interesting. And it always just ties back around to, as you can tell, faith is really important to us, but just encouragement from the Bible, or I pray over you, or it's just really great for the soul.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you both for being on our podcast today. This is a treat. It was a very big joy for us. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel so honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
We want to thank all of you for joining us today on Couple Synergy. Our passion is in helping couples and people have happy and healthy relationships. And this podcast gives us a fun way of bringing our knowledge and expertise to you, our listeners.
Sharing stories have been ways that human beings have been sharing and processing and bonding and growing since the beginning of time. We hope that by you guys sharing your story, it's enriched your lives and the lives of our listeners.
For all of you listening, please subscribe to our podcast and let us know how you enjoyed the show. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, please email us at contact@couplesynergy.com. For more information about Couple Synergy and our programs such as Relationship 101, our home study course, the Couples Weekend Intensive, and our premier coaching program called Couple to Couple, look us up online at couplesynergy.com.
And we just found a new beautiful space for the Weekend Intensive. So
Yes.
Look for that soon coming up. And if you know someone who could benefit from this episode, please download it and share it. And thank you for listening.
Until next time, synergize your life and synergize your love.
You have been listening to Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Couple Synergy was recorded, edited, and produced by Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Voiceover and music entitled Breathe and Let Go was recorded and composed by Gina Gonzalez.